It is 5:32, and I call the Richland 2, Tuesday, January 31st, 2023 work session to order. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Nash.
I move to approve the agenda for the January 31st, 2023 work session.
Is there a second? A motion has been made by Mrs. Nash and seconded by Dr. Scott. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. All those in favor, please raise your right hand.
Oh, crap. I haven't signed.
All those opposed? The vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Moving on to item 3.1, board priorities and goals. Mr. Nate O'Neill. Excuse me, are you doctor? No. Oh, okay, someone said doctor, all right.
Well, but my dad is a doctor.
Yes.
It's one of those, yeah, my dad's a doctor on TV kind of things. Good evening, everyone. Madam Chair, board members, Nancy Gregory, interim superintendent, thank you guys for being here tonight and allowing us to come. I work with innovation as innovation program designer, and my new colleague, Dr. Keejalyn Folk, as our innovation program specialist, who will help me out this evening. We're here for about 30 minutes, which is probably not enough time to do it justice. We're here for 30 minutes tonight to help us set our priorities, because the school board can't do everything. We've got to prioritize what it is sort of collectively that we want to be focused on this year, and that's what we're here to do, to help you kind of segue that conversation this evening. And so we're going to spend some time targeting our top priorities tonight in order for us to then later on hopefully build out some SMART goals to ensure that our priorities are getting worked out in the real world. We like that the South Carolina School Board Association's document talking about the roles of a school board use 4 key roles, but they all focus around vision. The first one, of course, is just to create a shared vision as a board. The second one's around accountability, and this is what we're talking about measuring and communicating vision. And the third one is about structuring, which is about applying the vision to the real world. And the fourth one is advocacy, which is really championing the vision that you guys have set together. So with that, of course, you guys know you have lots of functions. Policies, the hire and evaluation of superintendent, overseeing and adopting budgets, monitoring student success, working with teachers, and having a sort of legislative and judicial and executive role. There's a lot of things you guys have to work on. And but it really, I hope to come away tonight with sort of a human-centered focus on this. And that's the little sheet that I gave you guys in front of you there. It's just kind of something we'll use in just a bit, but the pictures along the bottom are just there to show us, you know, what kind of people we're serving, what people we're working with this year as board members. We've got 28,000 students from 3K to 12. Some of them are multilingual learners, multilanguage speakers. Some of them are struggling through issues with homelessness and poverty. We've got students who are having IEPs and 504s. Students are gifted and talented. Some headed to the workforce, college, some headed to military. Probably hundreds of thousands of families and community members that we're serving, that we're helping them, whether it's homeowners, nuclear extended families, 1- and 2-parent families, business members, lots of people in the community that we're serving and supporting. Over 2,000 instructional staff, specialists, teachers, TAs, instructional leaders, and then also all the support staff, over 1,000 of them full-time, who help us with meals, buses, technology, all the great guys here that help out with setting these things up. Just from HR to finance to maintenance, there's so many things and so many people we really want to focus on tonight. And so what I want you to do now, if you can, we're going to give you a couple of minutes to sort of individually brainstorm, because the individual is very important in this process. Each of you brings something interesting to it. So we've got each of you a packet of sticky notes of a different color so we can kind of keep up with who's posting what ideas. And so for right now, I know you've got your Chick-fil-A box there and your speaker and everything, but if you could just maybe clear yourself a little bit of a space. What you want to write on your sticky notes is, using your Sharpie marker, you pick the color that we've given you options of there. You want to write 1 priority per sticky note. Don't try to like save the planet right now and write all 5 on 1 sticky note. 1 per sticky note, and try to keep them nice and succinct. As we share it out, we're going to go for succinctness tonight. Let's say you had one where you really want to make sure that all employees get a 10% pay raise by the end of the year. Okay, a little tongue-in-cheek there. But don't go that far. That's a goal, right? That's a SMART goal. It's got all the metrics of a SMART goal. But what you want to write on here as far as priorities go, this is going to be like increased salaries or bonuses. That's basically what we're shooting for tonight, your top priorities. So Tony's going to cue us up a little bit of music in a second. We'll give you guys 3 or 4 minutes. You want to just kind of brainstorm individually about your top priorities about what this board should be doing this year. It's okay if you end up with 10 or 12. We're going to kind of narrow down in a minute. So Kev, maybe about one or two more minutes. Just try to get as many of your top priorities out as you can. That was called the Tony Slow Fade. Very nice. Thank you, sir. All right, so hopefully that was enough time to kind of get your thoughts going. What I'm going to do now is give you another minute and a half to take all of your sticky notes and sort of look at all of them. And this is the difficult work of prioritizing now your top 3. So on your graphic organizer, for example, here's what mine might look like. I've got my 3 top ideas from, let's say I had 7 or 10 top priorities. I'm going to try to line up my number 1, my number 2, and number 3. Just like the magnet application, it is important which order you put things in. So try to put your very top priority, number 1, number 2, number 3. And we're going to use these in a second for you guys to share out to create a heat map on the board over there to kind of see where our priorities are as a board. So another minute and a half or so for you guys to choose your top 3 priorities. And if you can, please put them onto the graphic organizer here so you'll be able to see them visually. right, so now the sort of the mechanism will be, I will be the runner, and Dr. Folk will be the poster and clusterer. And so what we're basically do is kind of do 3 rounds of going around to every board member from this side to this side. And what you'll do first off is take off your number 1 idea, and you'll be able to share your thought, about 30 seconds or so on each one as I'm carrying it over and she's clustering it. And then I'll come back in number 2, and we'll do the number 2 round, number 3 round, just like that. So any questions about that? So we're going to start over here with Ms. Washington, and then we will go around the room and do that in 3 rounds.
So for my priority, I put safety, and really broad, but it includes mental health and school safety, transportation, and all of those great things.
Mine is a years of service bonus for signed contracts, and it goes with retention and recruitment.
Mine is also safety and security, and kind of my thoughts are having some form where we also involve some of our citizens who are really good at, security and safety, and also for our addressing some of the violence in our community.
My first priority is academic achievement, and increasing our graduation rate, and really taking a look at, especially when we're talking out pupils in poverty, are we really making an impact like we are intending to do so?
My first priority is, of course, safety and security, and especially after the things that occurred today. It should be a major, major sense of urgency, because if students are not safe and parents don't feel like their students are safe, nothing else really matters.
I also put down safety, and the thing is, I believe for the most part, we've just been very lucky, and you don't have programs based on luck. I think we really have got to examine how we're doing things and come up with some really, we got to come up with a new plan, because we've got guns in schools, and children being sent home, not getting educated. That's bad.
Mine is to increase the graduation rate, and that would be, expanding teaching and learning options for students to where they can learn on their level the way that, instead of doing so many tests after you've learned the material, figure out how that child learns and then teach that child that particular subject the way that they learn it.
Okay, now going to round 2. This is your second priority.
My second priority is bonuses for teachers and employees to help with recruitment and retention of qualified staff all around.
Mine is a special education reading intervention, Wilson Reading, and along with that was, I don't know if it goes with it or not, but social emotional health. I tried to squeeze it in there. A response district-wide.
I see you're using keys for
And I have hire and retain more teachers as well, and teachers' town halls, being able to listen to teachers and figuring out ways that they feel that they would like to see things happen as well, having their input.
My second priority is safety and security.
Hello? Okay. It's red. Okay. My second priority is fiscal responsibility with bonuses, teacher recruitment, and retention, because we have to make sure that we have money in place to pay these teachers to make them want to stay. And how do we recruit them? We recruit them with bonuses, with money, and with support.
My second one was support teachers and relieve burdens. And what I mean by that is, I think a lot of times we have our teachers doing things that other people could do. And we've got to get the most out of our teachers. I don't want to sound like a businessman there, but I mean, realistically, they're the thoroughbreds here. We've got to get the most out of them. If there's things that they're doing that other people can do, we need to look into that.
Fun fact, Lindsay's a twin and I'm a twin, and tonight we're twinning because I'm going to go with safety and security as my second one as well. Yes, so with safety and security, you know, my kids are at Spring Valley issue today, you know, and just in general, not just any particular school, but all schools. Our students need to be able to safe from elementary through high school, so that would be my second one.
So now we're on to round 3.
So my third priority is going to be school-based making sure that we have the right people in place at all schools for all things such as behavior, as well as academics.
I had using ESSER funds for discipline training district-wide for a in-school program that we could use long-standing district-wide.
And what kind is there for the discipline specific?
Right.
And mine is for closing our our learning loss gap. But I also have this wonderful dream that I believe that we can have where our academics, where we could be in the top 25 in the nation as a district. So that would be a goal for me.
Recruiting and retention, both employees and teachers.
And I'm not a twin, but it runs in my family on my father's side. So student academic achievement. And I say that students cannot achieve at a higher level if they're hungry, if they don't feel safe, cared for, loved, and if they don't have a teacher standing in front of them who is certified, competent, and loving.
Fill vacancies. You can't get it done without people in the positions.
I actually have kind of two. One was when we're doing buildings and things, I would like to get a swimming pool for our students, but that wouldn't be like a main priority, but the school home loop, and then include all those extracurricular activities for our students in that. And what I mean by the school home loop is that not even just after school, but when students are traveling and things like that, that there is time for them to make up their work and make sure that, because not everyone's going to want to take vacations on the vacations that are planned on the calendar. And so just to make sure that students are able to make up those days and make up that homework in a timely manner.
All right, so after the 3 rounds here, we're going to do one more round in just a second. So to give you, because hopefully you've got some things from that someone else sparked. You're like, oh, that's really important for me as well. But sometimes on our own, we can ideate to a certain extent, but that's why we need the collective to help us have that shared vision. So obviously a lot of things clustered around the idea of safety, physical safety, social emotional safety. All those things have come up for you guys multiple times on the board. There's definitely a lot of talk about teacher recruitment and retention, and hiring, filling vacancies, finding ways to support teachers with higher salaries or bonuses. A few in the category of increasing graduation rate, student achievement. That's definitely a big cluster, and maybe a couple more sort of outliers that had maybe single references. So those are some of our biggest clusters at this point. So again, we're going to give you 1 more minute. This is another time to kind of let you reflect on what's been said, what you've already had. So maybe you're gonna give us one more sticky note, And so this time, you might want to go back to one of yours. You're like, this was a great one. I wanted it to be up there, but it didn't get a chance. So this is a chance to add another one of your own priorities, or if there's a priority that was mentioned by someone else or someone else's thoughts referred you to something, you can add that one now. So we'll give you guys a few seconds here to kind of write down one more, and then we'll do a final round to add one more to the board.
I guess I'll lump everything in. That's cool.
Was it adequate time? All right, so let's go around one more round, same sort of thing. Share out your final priority, and then we'll post it up on the board and do a final summarization.
Graduation rates, because I believe once we get students at a level where they're learning and they can excel, then we'll be able to graduate them.
I have more advocacy as it pertains to legislation of things that affects our schools. There's so many things like bureaucratic things that kind of keep us from doing the things that we need to be able to do. So that would be my.
I actually have two, and it's interesting looking at that. And in my mind, I put up long-term ongoing goals. I have two: hire the superintendent and addressing the IG report, which I feel are also very important, but they're hopefully immediate, relatively short-term goals. Will you take them?
I'll take it.
And my next goal would be the CATE program. I am a former CATE teacher, and we all know that not everyone wants to go to college, and that's okay, as long as we provide the student academics that they need to be successful in their adult world. And I think with CATE programs, it allows students to have a real life and meaningful career. And with that, everyone knows, especially when I first ran for school board, I'm an advocate for CATE with air conditioning, auto mechanics, refrigeration, cosmetology, and barbering. And that's something where students can really come straight from high school and have a meaningful, productive, positive career and be positive, productive citizens. So, CATE.
I basically put to motivate our students, and I put two things particular to motivate them to accomplish more academically and to be more respectful. And I think it's important, we can force people to do things, but if we can motivate them, we get a whole lot more done. So.
And I chose extracurricular activities, much like what Dr. Scott was saying, offering other things for students to do other than just, the typical ones that we have, like expanding different programs, the firefighter program that's at Westwood, and like she said, the cosmetology, but doing extra things like that in the afternoon or any time really that they can get extra education on things that aren't the typical, Thank you.
Affordable meals or free meals, possibly looking into our own meal management, just revisiting that whole situation and trying to find the best fit for better meals and better cost.
And while you're doing that, Nate, I have to just say that's one of those restorative practices move you just did. You went back to the student because most times they hope you forget, not in Ms. Porter's case, but that was one of those restorative practices that we have so much going on in our head and we're so busy that when the student said, will you come back to me? We never get back to them. So kudos to you. Restorative practices, kudos.
Hey, I'll take it. Thank you very much. All right, so I think we're good. We're at about 25-minute mark. We've done great. So at this point, what we'll do is take all the priorities that you guys have posted up here on the board. We'll put it into a document that you guys can more easily read besides just sticky notes. We'll help it sort of rank and categorize things into top areas. And actually, if you would like, we'd also like to take up any other sticky notes you have on the papers there, if you want to submit them as like also RANs, because I think it's also good just to sort of see what else is percolating out there. It might help us to kind of see if there's more emphasis in some of the ones that were kind of singleton ideas, and maybe there is a bit more thought on those in those categories as well. So we'll just come around just 1 second, and then I'll kind of wrap us up for the evening. So again, you'll see more from us. We'll send you a document through the powers that be to let you guys see what you've got there, and I hope that this time helps you sort of see where you guys are kind of at sort of visually, and hopefully from there you'll be able to take these top priorities and move them into the steps of making goals and creating real actionable items that you guys will be able to accomplish this year to really feel like you guys have done, you know, sort of like you've got that vision together, you've done it, you've advocated for it, you've built the structures for it, and that you've championed it. So thank you very much for your time. We'll do a little collection there, and thanks for your attention and your cooperation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you.
Board members, are there any more questions, comments? Thank you both.
Madam Chair, I do have a question.
Mrs. Washington?
So we know that we're going to get a document from them. What's going to be our next steps as a board to make sure that we do have something in place where we're going to meet again to set these priorities?
We can set another special called meeting or workshop so that we can address the ongoing issues. This was a short period of time to address that. That was the amount of time that they were given. So I'm very receptive to having a follow-up meeting to address what they come up with.
Madam Chair, I would like to suggest that I think we're due for a board retreat within the next month, and instead of having a special call board meeting, I would like to suggest that we consider making this part of the board retreat that we plan to have within the next month or two.
That would be a great idea. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mrs. Porter.
I'd like to suggest that the document that he create, that we separate it into a long-term, short-term document that can be a working document that's managed or housed by our superintendent or someone that's neutral, so that we always have a record of it and can look back to it.
And we can look into that. I mean, that's fine with me. That would have to be something that we would coordinate with them.
Madam Chair, if I could just add something else to that, these top 3 priorities are the board priorities. So I would like for that to be amongst the board and not the superintendent, because superintendent have superintendent priorities and these are school board priorities.
Right.
So we don't want to confuse.
No, and I think what she's suggesting is just having it listed as board priorities and we have access to it. It's not something that we're asking administration to adopt, but we hope that we work together with their priorities and our priorities.
I just didn't want it to violate any rules for us having a document that all of us could see or edit in it.
Well,
be
and that
issued.
needs to be something to be looked into with FOIA.
Right,
And
exactly.
how we do that.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions? All right, moving on to item 3.2, board meeting calendar, agenda and work session dates. Mrs. McFadden, it's my understanding you had asked for this to be on the agenda?
Yes, ma'am. So we do have a list of of all of our board meetings. So there are certain quarterly reports that we have, such as the budget, pupils, academic, safety, operations, and human resources. And so when those are put on our agenda, if you would look, and it's divided up into 4 quarters, there's only a few places that all these can go. So we're talking about 5 items that are going into 2 and 3 board meetings in a quarter. So what I would like to do is figure out a way that we could adjust some of these. We would still get the report, but we wouldn't have to go through the presentation, and that will cut down the time that we are spending on presentations. So for instance, we would still get our budget updates, our academic updates. They would come to our board docs as well as, the links that we get for our board briefs. So we could still get that information, but we wouldn't necessarily have to have staff come up and go page by page, line by line, and read those to us. We could get our questions together that we would need over the weekend, and when they come to the podium, if we have any questions or someone wanted to go through with it, then they could be prepared to do that. A lot of times our presentations are great, they're fantastic, and we do want to go through them, but sometimes it's a hit or miss, and we can just literally go through it ourselves. We don't have to spend so much time at the board meeting. We could be discussing board business.
I guess my question is to you, and thank you for, your suggestion. How was that determined?
Okay, so for quarter one, we would say, for instance, we've already had our pupils report, our academics, our operations, our human resources. So we only have safety, and then of course our budget workshop, which is already on the schedule. So the only one that we would need to complete between now and March would be, the end of March, March 28th, would be safety, and I do believe that is on the calendar. We also have, for instance, our strategic plan that's coming up in next month. So that would be a check off of the quarter. So that would leave a space for board members who would want to get a certain policy on there as time to go ahead and put several policies instead of one or two. We could get multiple policies on there, have them read through and whatever we want to adjust, and we could go through the policy that we want to do. As far as having just one or two on there, we could have first, second, and third reading within three meetings and be done, and there'll be a whole slew of policies that we want to change quickly done. Because if she only gets one and you get one and he gets one, then that's first, second, and third reading, and we're getting a new policy every month. There's not enough time to get through everything. So if we could shorten the presentations, get the policies that are pertinent to everyone on the agenda, do 4 or 5 at a time, read through them. When it comes on the screen, we already know whether we want it, what we want to change, first, second, third reading, and it's done, and we can move on to other things, like getting that list of things, because policy has to come first. So once we get the policies changed, then we'll be able to focus on that. And so my suggestion would be for everyone to get a few policies that you're desperate to be changed, like we've got some already, and submit them so that we can go through them and say, let's go ahead and put them on here. If she's got 5, he's got 10, whatever, we'll be able to put it on the agenda. We have the dates down. It's pretty much empty. Budget workshop, summit, and retreat. It's pretty much empty. We can add what we want to on there. Because right now, our agenda's been made by the superintendent and the board chair, when the board needs to make our agenda and decide what we want to talk about.
Well, and I will just comment that I think with the adjustments that are being made to the policy BEDB, that will no longer exist. I mean, there will be the officers there that will have input in terms of what goes on the agenda, so it will no longer just be the superintendent and the board chair. And in terms of policies, one thing that I think that we do need to focus on, for example, is the IG report and policies. And then move forward with any policies that the board members want to. But I would caution us about removing academics and having it take a back seat, because that was one of the issues that were highlighted, or that was highlighted in the IG report, was the minimal academic presentations or discussions that we had at our board meetings.
Absolutely, and I agree with that. So what I mean is that the ones that we've already had, they've already been checked off. And when we go through, we can go ahead and put those on our calendar, and the policies and things that line up with those, or the topics that we want to discuss that line up with those. We don't actually need to do the full presentation on some of them. I agree academics would be one, but there are some that we may not necessarily have to have read to us line by line.
Board members, is there any other discussion, comments?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Nash?
do you know how many policies for our IG chair? Do you know how many policies we roughly would have left, I guess, or the time frame you think we could finish those?
There are not policies that need to be necessarily revised. We can review certain ones that have been highlighted, but it doesn't mean that we have to necessarily make a change. It was just a policy that was mentioned. The ones that need to be changed, those pretty much have been brought to the forefront. And we'll continue to talk through those, but every policy that was mentioned, it wasn't a recommendation to make a change to them.
Okay.
Right.
All right, and thank you. The one that I had in mind was trespassing. The no trespass was something that needed to be addressed, and changed. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And that was one of the things that I was going to bring up in our,
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. And does anybody else have any comments? I'll just say this in drafting the agenda, and thank you, Mrs. McFadden, again for your suggestions and recommendations. Having, sat in and formulated 4 agendas, and I'm going to use the last meeting as an example. I had at least 3 different board members call me and say why they wanted some other issue pulled or shortened or briefed or didn't know why it was being addressed on the agenda. So that's the problem or circumstance that I'm sitting with here. And hopefully that will help guide us in terms of where we go and what's selected for the agenda. And hopefully, particularly with the new board members who had platforms and, are very passionate about different issues, as we're moving through the meetings and tonight especially, your priorities were brought here tonight to discuss so that we could knock out a lot, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but address, the issues, concerns, or things that were really important to, several board members that we often don't have the opportunity or time to address in a normal board meeting.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to speak to that. For an example of one that you mentioned, the things that we discussed as priorities today, a lot of them, I really enjoyed hearing them because I felt like a lot of it was student focused, it was about our schools. However, the last meeting that we had, I felt like those were very much policy driven, and I heard from a lot of constituents feeling as though the meeting as a whole gave them the sense of it was about power, about transferring power from the superintendent to the board members. And that was the overall sense of feeling that they got after watching the meeting, because it was policy after policy transferring power and not so much of these priorities. And so when I hear these type of priorities in our conversations, this is what I'm used to hearing in our conversations. And then when you hear that in a board meeting or see these things come up on our agenda about these policies, it's like, whoa, where'd that come from? And it makes the tone and the atmosphere different. And so I know I'm one of those people who called and said, where is this coming from? And then that's when we hear about it. So,
Madam Chair, can I speak to that?
go ahead.
Mrs. Nash.
Okay. I just want to be sure that we understand what the board is supposed to do, because I totally agree. We have to be student-centered and focused on what we're doing here, but we also are a board that has to create policies, and a lot of our policies, the board is supposed to be oversight and accountability, and unfortunately, we weren't able to have that because of several policies right now. We have to have checks and balances, and I also heard from constituents, and it was very good to hear that they were very happy that we were putting in place checks and balances so that we can now make sure that hopefully we don't have to worry about funds, that we don't have to worry about giving teachers bonuses, because that's really what it's about. You can do nothing without money. You can't take care of your home as a person, as an adult, as a family, if you don't take care of the business first. So I think that those are very important things that we have to do in order to go on and do these things. I think I was very happy to see that we are all pretty much on the same plane, and I think that that is what I have known that where we were, and I'm just pleasantly surprised. But I think by what the public has been told or what has been out there is that there's a stigma that we aren't policymakers. We are, in fact, policymakers. That is what we do.
Mrs. Washington.
Yes, and I also wanted to say that a lot of times we have to make sure, and I said this very often, we have to make sure that the public understands the role of the school board. And a lot of times we hear that people have, they have really great intentions, and they're really championing behind things that we're saying and that we're doing. And then we have people that may not be championed, but we have to help the community and educate them in understanding the role of the school board. I love the fact that when we started this presentation, he took us back to the 4 things that the school board is responsible for. And so it's very important that the public understands that in order for us to start that process, we've got to make sure that the board has the authority to make those changes and to move forward so that we can be accountable, so that we can advocate for teachers, so that this is the shared vision. That's what the public is seeing, that we just created a shared vision of the direction that we want to go. That cannot happen until we set certain policies in place. And so I don't want the community to feel that we are trying to be power driven. I want them to feel that we're now empowered to do what we were elected to do, and that is to govern for Richland 2 for the betterment of our children and our teachers. And I have to say that because no matter what side we fall on, we were here and we are here for children and for our teachers.
Thank you, Mrs. Washington. Dr. Scott?
Well, I was going to just say ditto and not say anything because you did such a well, so thank you for that. And that's what I was going to say as well. I think the public sometimes don't understand our role, and we are policy makers. We are policy makers. And with some of the policies, they're outdated, or some of the policies were written for self-made man or woman. So we have to go back and revise those policies to make sure we're putting policies in place for our teachers, for our students, for safety, for fiscal responsibility. So, I mean, you guys have said it enough, so I don't need to keep reiterating that. But our first and number 1 job besides safety is policy makers.
Madam Chair?
Did you want to say?
Okay. And I just want to add that I do agree that we are policymakers, and I just want to encourage that we also not include our staff, because should we have ever in the future have a board where no one has the experience of being an educator, we're so fortunate that we do have a board where we have members who have education experience. But should you have a board that does not, I think it's important that you leave a role in place so that you do collaborate with the experienced staff within the district, because there are going to be times where you need the input of our professionals on staff. And I just want to make sure that that is not completely taken out. That's one reason why I always suggest committees, is because of when you work in small groups, it includes a member of the staff, so that when we are thinking about solutions, you get that input of, well, hold on a second, something that we've tried before and it didn't work. You get that input from the staff. And I just don't want that to get glossed over, or for us to forget it or feel that we're the policymakers and we don't need them, so that's it. Right.
So,
Okay.
Madam
Mrs.
Chair.
McFadden?
Madam Chair, in conclusion, I would just like to ask that for those things that everyone said that they would want as a priority, for us to place them on the agenda somewhere, an idea or whatever it is that they have. I know a lot of it will be taken care of in Ms. Porter's committees, but just so that when we're going through, if there's an issue or something, or a challenge or a policy that a particular board member wants, they can see it on there and be preparing, and others can as well, and say, and take time to actually vet what each member wants. So if we could, just like it says summer retreat or budget workshop, out beside of it, it can say after-school programs. In September 26th, we're going to talk about after-school programs. So get your buddies together that you know with after-school programs, and give information that that you can bring and share about what's working and what's not working. That way, we don't get something on Thursday and we've got to run around the weekend and figure out where we're reaching into, so that we'll be thoroughly ready to have a productive conversation if I know it's coming up in a few months. Thank you.
Well, any more questions or comments? And I thank everybody for that healthy discussion on the agenda and what needs to be done. And I'm hoping an understanding from the different perspectives of why some things are on and others aren't, and everybody's gained an understanding so that when people call me, it's not what I'm wanting, it's what different members of your colleagues are asking for. Okay, moving on. Item 3.3, board committees. Mrs. Porter.
Yes, I'd like to first start with reviewing the different types of committees that are possible. And so that is policy BDE, board committees.
I'm sorry, what was that again?
The different types of
The
committees.
policy number,
Oh,
sorry.
it's policy
It's
BDE,
BDE.
board committees. And I don't see it clearly on mine. Where is that? Not sure where it is. All right. But we have, there are different types of committees. And I'm going off the top of my head, I'm sorry. I wasn't able to find it on here. But we have our standing committees and, can you see it? Okay, all right, there it is, sorry. We have our standing committees, and then we also have our ad hoc committees, and then we have advisory committees. But I'd like for us to focus on standing committees first. Yes. And committee of the whole, yes. And I'd like to focus on standing committees and committee of the whole first. And I want to talk about my reasoning behind that. One, because I feel like there are a lot of changes being made. And I feel like standing committees will, one, just include ourselves and our current staff at this time, and including our outside persons will be for special situations and more short-term meetings, short-term committees for special situations. I feel like the board chair can discuss those type of committees when needed. But for standing committees, they're a little bit more long-term, things that we'll have in place and moving forward, and then having a discussion of when advisory committees and ad hoc committees are needed will come when that time presents itself. So standing committees, long-term, where we'll have a few members from our board and then district employees for the standing committees. And then also committee of the whole when we come back together and you have the standing committees report to the entire board. And that's where they will report and give the education that was learned and discussed with our staff members. I have some suggested committees, but they're not in stone. I know you said Ms. Porter's committees, but I'm definitely open to whatever your suggestions are, and different topics can fall into them. So I just have something for us to start with, and then of course this can be something that's changed. And that was Committee of Teacher Support and Recruitment as being one. And then Committee of Diversity, Inclusion, and Special Services, which would also include curriculum. Committee of Finance, Partnerships, and Community Outreach. And then the Committee of the Whole would include safety as there, because I know you're probably wondering where would safety go, and I feel like that's something with Committee of the Whole, because everyone finds that as a priority, or possibly an advisory committee if needed from our board chair or town hall. Then I feel like that would definitely be a committee of the whole, because everyone would want to give input there.
Dr. Dr.
Yes, I just wanted to add that when we're talking about the safety committee, I know we dismantled, well, it was dismantled, and I would like tonight to ask, especially with the recent incidents that we've had, that we go back and we reinstate the safety committee, and I would love to make sure that I serve on that committee as a chair or as just one of the members, but I think it's important that we go back and recreate the safety committee and do it ASAP. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Mrs. Nash.
I also would love to be on that committee, and in conversations with Sheriff Lott, he is eager to work with us and help us get started and give insight, and I think that is a valuable resource that we have, and we should definitely take advantage of it.
Thank you. Any more comments on committees,
Well,
preferences?
I do.
Okay.
If someone else would like to speak first, and then you can come back to me. Okay. The thing about committees is I had an opportunity to speak with someone from a neighboring school district, and one thing they shared with me that I didn't really think about, but it makes a whole lot of sense. She shared that they have committees in her school district, and what they do is they have a budget line item for committees. An example of that would be, let's say that we had a committee that dealt with like HR, with teacher retention and recruitment. Then board members will have an opportunity to even go and sit with the recruitment people at a conference, but it does not come out of your budget line item monies. It comes from the committee money, as well as like safety. If we have a safety committee and you want to go to like a DARE conference or SRO school conference so you can learn different information and bring back to committee, you can do that, but it comes from a different line item. And she said it has worked well for them for the last 7 years, and I think that's something that I would love for us to consider.
Okay, so we're talking about a safety committee of the whole, so that would include the whole board, being led by Dr. Scott.
Yes.
One concern that I have with safety committee is that we would have rules and procedures for what is discussed and what's not discussed. Just, I know that we've received emails and so forth from community members about a safety committee, and I would be concerned about the public knowing all the ins and outs of safety. I feel like some parts of safety should be kept in-house with the district. And so that's my only concern when I read some things that were sent to us, and I saw, you know, safety committee being live streamed and things like that. And that was alarming to me, because I feel like some of that does need to stay in-house.
And it does, but also safety is an issue where we can go into executive session, and the board can invite who they want to come into executive session. And we'll have to go through that with legal, but that's my understanding of reading FOIA and how the board operates, that we can invite people into executive session if it's an issue that should not be discussed publicly.
And Ms. Agostini, can I add to that? And that's what we've done before. Anytime SROs or the security officers had to share something with us that they're now doing, or Will Anderson department, that wasn't something that was live streamed. That was something that was executive session.
Great, fantastic.
Madam Chair.
Mrs. Nash?
I think that probably still a great idea, because I do think that we should involve the community, is once we come out of those meetings, not to share what makes some of the ins and outs, because you can't with safety, but to have a discussion about things that are concerns, some form of town hall where input can be given from parents and, you know, our community, to keep them involved. I think that we have to do a better job of that. Of bridging the gap and winning the trust back of our community.
And that's exactly what the committee of the whole can do on safety, is, you know, coordinate and plan those activities in town halls to get the community involved.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If we could also talk to our PR about literature for our parents, for like the event that happened today, for our new parents and parents who don't know what to do if we have procedures already in place for them to have that should something happen.
For safety, that, and I will lean on administration to address that issue, or to talk about, I'm sure that there's systems in place and emails that went out and communications that were made.
A lot of it was a lot on social media, but,
And we have that, and unfortunately, we have that now, and Greg might be able to speak to that, but things get quicker or put out on social media and just misinformation versus accurate information, so. Yeah, and you can come, please.
Let me turn that on. As far as communication goes, social media is just a part of one component of it. So for instance, this morning with our evacuation of Spring Valley High School, there were 3 phone calls, 2 emails, and 3 text messages that went to all staff, parents, and students. So that's the primary. Text message would be the primary because it's immediate. Social media is actually how we get the message to the media the fastest. So we use Twitter today. So as I'm personally sending the messages out, the media is getting the message through there. So we don't rely on that for parents. But the phone call, I voiced the phone calls today. The email comes out as fast as we can, and then on and on.
And can I add something to that? Once we are able to get our cell phones, it will be great if we can add board members' cell phone numbers to those calls. I know when I was in Lee County, anything that went out also came to our cell phones as well. So that would be great.
I would like to.
Thank you for the work today.
I would like to speak on that. I am a parent and a board member, so I was getting board member information, and then moments later, I was getting parent information. So as soon as I found out something as a board member, the parents were receiving that same information. And so there, someone said, well, LaShawna didn't make a phone call today. Well, I didn't have to because I got information as soon as it happened. My kids were calling me, so I got a phone call from my kids, the school, and other members of staff. So there was no time gap where I needed to get information. Everything was right there. So thank you, team. I didn't have to make those phone calls today, so I appreciate that. But I would like to speak about the committee.
Okay.
Okay, so another committee that I would like to think about, along with what Ms. Porter has said, is an SIC committee. And that is the School Improvement Council. Every one of our schools have one. It is mandated by law. It's my passion. I remember before I got started with anything, I went through that pins and needles with Spring Valley High School and with E.L. Wright and Lonnie B. Nelson. And that's the school that my kids went to. And it's very good information, and every year they have to put out a report. And it would be helpful if board members were able to form a committee that we're saying they want us to go to those schools. It doesn't necessarily have to be a committee, but just a time where we're reporting back before we get to the end of the year when the state does their report card and we're looking at it and we're surprised at this, but that we know every moment along the way where we are with the district report card and where our students are falling at individual schools.
Any other? Go ahead, Mrs. Washington.
Would that be considered like an advisory committee because that would include parents and staff members?
It could, but it would also need to be a standing committee, something that rolled over every year, because we're in a 5-year plan right now. We've just started it, a 5-year plan. I think we have to turn in that paperwork the end of April. And so every April, a new report needs to be done, but every 5 years it needs to be done as well. So if we can keep fresh on it, it won't take so long to update that strategic plan.
And if it's the will of the board, or if you can establish a committee, I've just sat on SICs, and I'm not sure that I would want, that's sort of the independence of the school, how I look at it. So I'm not sure that I would want the board coming in and being involved. It'd be great that they're interested in what we're doing, but directing or providing oversight to it would not be something that would have appealed to me as being a member of the SIC at a certain school.
I don't know that it would be oversight. I think it would be just us going. I know that the ones that I was on, we always wanted board members to come and give their input just to make sure that we were doing what we were supposed to be doing. If there are any suggestions from the board, because not everybody watches the board meetings, contrary to popular belief. Not everybody's watching our board meetings, and not even all the teachers are watching our board meetings,
Correct.
So, they're getting secondhand information. So if we as board members can come and say, well, this is our academic report, can you tell me what you're doing, or, can you explain? And we don't have to go all the time, but just some of us to be responsible for that, because if we're talking about policy and we're talking about what our job is, this is a state mandated report that we have to do.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Porter.
by definition, though, we wouldn't be able to have a standing committee, though, because we can't have, we wouldn't have community members in a standing committee. It would have to be an advisory one.
That's
However.
fine. Thank you for that clarification.
It's okay. I do think that an advisory committee, or at least an event where all the SIC members would have an opportunity to meet with the board to communicate, I think that would be an excellent idea, specifically for them to be the audience. To share.
Thank you. And, my comments on that would be something, in my opinion, that I'd like to see in the future. The two things, and again, this is open for the board. If you can find support and board members that want to establish that committee, that would be terrific. It's my opinion, one, that we need a finance committee, somebody to provide oversight for that. And the other thing, and Dr. Scott and I had a brief conversation, but we need to remember that we are now in the process of needing to look for a new superintendent. And whether it's a committee of the whole or have just a small committee, and when I say a small committee, what I'm saying is not 3 people pick out who the superintendent is, but thinking about the process of coordinating the RFP and, working with, when we put out, if this is what we decide we're going to do and put out an RFP, who's going to, collect the applications or the RFPs, the proposals, and then coordinate the interviews with the companies and do some of that stuff. All of the board members would be in there, but at some point whether we do it as a committee, like 3 people coordinating it, or we do it as a committee of the whole, what I don't want us to do is get so bogged down in committees. I'd like to start off with just a few and get them up and running and being successful, and then we can grow and expand our committees. Dr. Scott.
Yes, and thank you for that. When I think about a superintendent search, I think all input from all board members should be valued, and not a small committee. I think every board member should be involved with every piece of information, every committee meeting with feedback. So I would recommend that we have what's called a committee of the whole when we're talking about a superintendent search. And then 2, I think when we consider that, we need to have questions prepared when we come about when we're doing this search, are we looking for someone to appoint, that we're appointing someone, or we're doing a national search? So we need to come together first before we even think about a committee and just have conversations and then work forward. Let's get the foundation first, and then we can build the house.
Madam Chair. I agree with you and Dr. Scott on keeping the committee small for now, and so my suggestion would be safety, superintendent, and finance as well.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mrs. Porter.
So what I hear is, this is one of my teacher strategies, is we have a committee of the whole for safety, and that would be longstanding, so an always existing committee, a committee of the whole for safety. Then we have a committee of the whole, which is short-term for the search for superintendent. And this would be something that we can put on the agenda to vote on in the future, in our next meeting. And then also go ahead and establish our Committee of Finance, Partnership, and Community Outreach. And so then then what we need to decide is what 3 members from our board would like to sit on that committee in the future.
And is that something, so I'm in alignment with that idea, those 4 committees. Is that something that we want to do tonight, or is that something that we can express? It says that they put the request into the board chair. I would be happy to work with Mrs. Porter, since she was instrumental in getting these committees up and running. Board members, are you okay with sending your preferences to? Well, we already
Ms.
have the
Porter?
IG report, first of all.
Oh, you're talking about the IG report? You mean Ms. Porter or Ms.?
I was
You
saying
can
Ms.
appoint
Porter.
them.
Oh, you said Ms. Washington.
I
that's why,
probably
sorry.
did. I'm sorry, I misspoke. But no, with,
You can appoint those.
Yeah, you would have.
okay.
Would like to be on safety, Madam Chair.
Everybody's on the safety and the superintendent committee. They're committees of the whole. All right, so is there any further discussion about committees? So we've got 4 that we've got established, the IG, the safety, and superintendent committees, which are separate ones, but committee of the whole, and then finance, partnership, and community outreach.
Are you going to appoint those for finance, partnership, community outreach?
I will, but I want to check with each individual and find their interest.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
my interest will only be in safety and the superintendent search.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. McFadden, did you have a comment?
I think we need to do an SIC one. I mean, if I can recruit another person to go with me, that would be great. But the fact that it is something that we need to do, I think that we should do it. So, I mean, if I could get support, that would be great. If not, I understand, but I could go, you know.
Ms. McFadden,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
think with the SIC, I think that should just be open to board members to choose whatever school they would like to go and be a part of. Because going to one meeting at SIC, you're not going to be able to see the entire picture. And I, which I only speak for myself, most definitely won't be choosing one school and going to every SIC meeting. So I think that's just something that should be left up to each individual board member.
Understand.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mrs. Porter.
may I suggest that we just state for the record for those that are listening, or that we send something out to our SIC leaders, that if they'd like to invite board members and have a meeting or hear from us or share something with us, that they could coordinate amongst themselves a date, and we could visit one and see them all at once. But as far as holding a whole committee for it, for a possible one visit or a quarterly visit, it might not be necessary. But more.
Yes, Mrs. Washington?
What is due by the end of the year? I guess that's what I need clarification on, just to understand the purpose of the committee.
Okay, so every year they have to report how many students they have. They have to report whatever, they get to choose to report what activities they have, the clubs they have, the number of students they have, and we have to literally have, the number of parents have to have 2 to 3 parents, the principal, and what it is that they go through and they do an analysis of their school. And so if we could have a meeting, even if it has to be quarterly and we only meet a few schools at a time, or have a presentation, or maybe not even a presentation, but just information coming from our schools. If we're talking about, I mean, they tell the graduation rate, they tell the demographics, all the information that we need as a district comes from these school report cards. And that's what's given to us as a district. We have a district-wide one. We have one for each school, and it goes to the state. So when we're looking at ourselves through the lens of academics across the nation, that is what is given and provided, that comes from the school that they're working on all year long.
And I'm just going to say, at that point, and I hope to, just, table this discussion regarding it. To me, it sounds like what we're doing as board members is now going in and providing administrative oversight
Right.
to a school.
Yes.
And that's not what we're here for.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that, we should be a part, in my opinion. And I mean, we have regional directors all over, and I'm going to say my piece, but we are chosen as regional director. Even here, this district is with another district, and they vote for regional directors and regional people and we don't know when our next term is going to be. It's a 3-year term. It should be up in 2022 or 2023. So then that means one of us will be coming next for the state, for the region. So we need to know about it, in my opinion. That's my passion, so I'll just put it out there. If I don't have support, that's fine, because I can go on my own and just let you guys know what's going on and that kind of thing. But I appreciate the discussion.
All right, thank you, Mrs. McFadden. Moving on, item 3.4, discussion parliamentarian. Mrs. Nash.
This is really just an update, so it'll be very brief. But we are because I don't think everybody has been able to have the chance to, but we are looking for a parliamentarian. And I don't know if, Nancy, do you want to speak to what we discussed as far as the process? Because I know Christine's not here right now, but I think were you in there for that one? No, that's right. It wasn't you. It was you, Marshall Lynn. Hi. Do you want to speak to, because we were talking about the process, so everybody understands what we have and where we are? Sorry, I put you on the spot there.
No problem. And so what has occurred so far is we've researched parliamentarians who are registered parliamentarians through the National Association of Parliamentarians, as well as gotten a couple referrals from, I think, a community member. And so the process would be determining the scope of service that we're expecting from a parliamentarian, and then reaching out to those individuals to share the scope of service to see if it's something that they would be interested in and what their charges will be.
And just, Madam Chair, are those things that the scope, is that the part where we have to figure out the scope, right?
That is correct. So
Right,
the board
so-
would determine the scope of work that they would like from a parliamentarian. For example, are you expecting a parliamentarian to come to the remainder of the regular board meetings through June, through the end of the calendar year? Do you want the parliamentarian to do a workshop with the board, workshops with the board in terms of training? And so the scope of service, yes, will be determined by the board.
Okay.
Chair,
Dr. Scott.
my question will be, what is the timeline on this? Because in my opinion, we should have had them yesterday. So what is the timeline, and what are we doing to speed up this process of being able to get a parliamentarian in, at least in the next month or so?
So now that we have clarity in terms of procurement, because that was something that we definitely wanted to check first, we could move forward with contacting the individuals who are on the list.
And once we do that, is that something that will come back to the board for us to decide who we want, or is that something that you guys will make that decision?
I think it depends on the interest that we get. Last year when we were looking for a parliamentarian, we didn't have very much luck with finding one who would be interested in doing the work. And so this time around, we're hopeful that we'll have a different result. And let's say, for example, if of the, I believe there are like 8 or 9 on the list, if there's only one who is interested and wants to do the scope of work that we're looking for, then I think we would go with that person. If there are multiple, I think we bring it back to the board chair, possibly during one of the agenda setting meetings.
Okay, because I know we had a few board members who had a recommendation for someone, so I hope you guys shared that name as well.
Yes, we have that name. The person is on the list.
Okay, because that person is interested, so I don't want us to come back and say we don't have anyone, because that person has stamped the approval. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Nash.
I was just going to say, so at this time, I don't know if you want to figure out what our scope of work is, because I mean, I would imagine that it's fairly small, or is that something that you want to do?
I had talked to Christine about it and filled out a brief, it was 2 or 3 questions.
Perfect.
And I believe I forwarded it to you and Dr. Scott. And I forward it always to the officers when I'm sending information from the board to administration. So that's why they received the information, and
And-
perhaps you all didn't, but.
I can forward it to you
Yes.
independently to you the way FOIA requires.
And
it.
Madam Chair, I think I sent maybe a month ago a suggestion on being able to do that, because we know that we can't forward everything to all 7 board members. But I think I suggested that when we get something, that we have people that we're tied to. For an example, Mrs. Nash may forward what information she has to Ms. Porter and Ms. Washington. I may forward what I have to Mr. Trapp and Mrs. McFadden. And I think we need to come up with one system of how we're going to do that, because we don't want anyone to feel left out. And I know we want to make sure we stay without having a formal meeting. So if we can agree tonight, if possible, how we're going to submit or send information when it's given, I think that will show an even playing field and everyone feel valued and important.
Well, and that's not on the agenda, but I would love for you to take charge of that and just send out a list. If I send it to you two send it to those two.
Done.
But you have to make sure you connect the two webs.
So,
And I'll send an email just to Ms. Nash so I can say, make sure you send it to those two, and we'll make sure it gets done.
okay, thank you.
I do have a question, Madam Chair.
Regarding the parliamentarian? Thank you.
Yes. In the scope of sequence, or the scope of the work, did you include training, like at a board retreat?
Yes, I did ask for that. That
Okay.
was one thing, I mean, that's been a priority of mine.
Okay.
And it was, we were supposed to have, at the February 3rd meeting, a parliamentary training. And looking at the calendar, well, we've talked about having a March workshop or in the next couple of weeks or months. We'll have to get together with that, Ms. Lewis, and find out what we want. But definitely parliamentary training is a priority.
And did we also ask for the remainder of this year so we can see how that person connects with us?
Sure, we always should have a parliamentarian
Okay.
at the meetings. All right,
Great, thank you.
thank you. Okay, item 3.5, the audit.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Trapp.
I have some questions. I'm sure we all want information regarding the audit. Who do we address in the?
I believe that Dr. Miley, is Dr. Miley here to answer questions regarding the audit?
Good evening. Yes, sir.
Hey,
If I could, I wanted to mention one thing. The procurement process for the parliamentarian, just adding on to the last discussion, it's an exempt procurement under our code, so you don't have to go through any RFP process or anything like that. So when you decide in getting the scope of services, the fees, and y'all decide who you want to hire, we don't have to go through any other procurement process. Second, the funding for that is not in your budget, and so we would probably, we think that you would have adequate revenues in your budget. We might have to make a budget transfer to allocate those funds to hire parliamentarian. Yes, sir.
okay.
Thank you, I was writing those notes down. Mr. Trapp.
No, first of all, I have read the letter that was published yesterday. I guess I'll repeat a few things to make sure I understand exactly what we're doing. We have submitted our audit to the independent audit firm, and they have it, and we're expecting them to have it done by the end of the week and
Yes,
submitted?
Yes, sir. We compile most of the financial statements. We have always done that. Some districts have the auditing firm do that. We have always done that. They take them and review them and confirm that they're accurate, and then they do their analysis to report back to us with their independent audit. We have submitted those financial statements to them, and they are reviewing them. We got a call today. They have several questions. I went through those questions today and asked the people that are over those funds and statements to get back with me tomorrow so we can address those and get back to the auditor.
Okay. And I want to make sure I'm straight on all these timelines. The audit was due December 1st.
Correct.
And that's a date that's established by law. We
Correct.
have no input on that. And we had 60 days, I think, before it became
You have 30-day
issue.
grace period, and then the 60-day kicks into actions by the State Department of Education.
Now, has that 60 days passed?
60 days was up yesterday.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. And I guess my question, and I do have some questions regarding looking back, but this is all looking forward. It would seem to me from reading some of the emails that there's some consequences to that not being submitted on time.
There may be. Yes, sir.
What are some of the potential consequences that you're aware of?
I don't have the law in front of me,
Okay.
but they can put you on watch. They can ultimately, if things aren't improved, and if they're never, for instance, if your audit was never turned in, they could sanction you. They could, actually, ultimately, they could put you on fiscal they could take over your district,
Yeah.
as they did in Sumter, and they could take over your district. But we think that we'll be in within the next few days, and we hope that that will satisfy the SDE.
Is there a chance that we might lose any federal funding or anything because of this?
We don't think so,
Yeah.
if we get it in soon, but that is always a chance.
Yeah. So, and I did read in the letter, and I know you guys were swamped because of the IG investigation. The IG report, or the IG investigation started maybe in June, is that, or was it July?
Yeah, I think it was June 22nd that we got,
Okay.
that the governor wrote the IG's office.
Okay. I think the letter I read had like 600 hours were tied up doing
That was
things.
our staff. Yes, sir.
How many people are on the staff that works on all this? I'm just
We
curious.
probably had about 6 or 8 people that had participation in it.
Yeah.
But there were 3 people that led most of the effort in terms of gathering the data. And the lead person on that was also our lead person for our audit.
Okay, okay. Well, has some of the vacancies recently, have they affected the timeline of all this? You know, we had one of our financial people.
No, we were already late. We missed the December 1st deadline when we had no issue. Nobody had put in any kind of a notice of leaving. Our chief financial officer, Shelley Allen, her last day was last Friday.
Yeah.
She worked diligently while she could, but the reason that it was late was not because she left on Friday.
Right, oh, yeah, yeah,
Yes.
and that, yeah, she couldn't, yeah, I figured her day, last day was Friday, that couldn't have affected that in that way. I guess, next question I have is, looking forward, obviously, hopefully, we're not ever gonna have the Inspector General do another investigation, so that was.
We hope so.
But, and I don't want to sound negative, but I've worked in industries all my life where you had deadlines and you just didn't miss the deadline. For example, we would often redo the HVAC in a dorm in the summer, and if you didn't have the air conditioner put back in when the students came back, you had to put students in hotels. Well, we never did that because that's seriously expensive, and if we lose funding here, that could be a real problem for our budget and everything. 60 days seems like an awful long time to have gotten things done that.
There were 34 working days. Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah. Looking forward in the future, is there anything we could do that would, next year, I'm assuming it'll be on time.
We plan to do that. We should be fully staffed by then. The problem is if it had occurred, if the IG's report had been in February to May, it wouldn't have affected our audit. If the IG had been here from November to April, it wouldn't affect our audit. He was here July, August, September, and October. Those are the months that we close out all accounts and do the audit. That was the problem. It was just timing. There was nothing we could do. There was no way we could not respond to the IG, and we couldn't do everything. So.
Oh, yeah, I understand. And I'm assuming the nature of this work, it wouldn't be feasible to bring in temporary staff to help with this.
Correct. There are certain things that you can get temporary staff to help with.
Right, right.
In our financial system, we adopted a financial system, software system. There's 81, I believe, 81 public school districts in South Carolina. Probably 2 to 3 software systems are used throughout the state. That is, there are probably 20 or 30 states that use some of them. We're the only district in the state that uses our financial system. So someone that doesn't work in Richland 2, that comes from another district, may be an excellent financial analyst, but they don't know how to use our software system.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's very difficult to say, oh, can we get this person to come in and help us for 2 weeks? They won't know our system for 2 weeks. So that is another problem. Again, it's still my fault, okay, that it's late, but that's an example of one of the reasons that it's just not as easy as it may appear that, oh, we'll just get some extra help to come in and do the audit.
Yes, sir. No, I fully relate to that because there are times that you try to bring people in, if they're not experts, they actually slow you down. So
Correct.
I'm not suggesting, I figured that was the case. I thought I would ask that.
And all of y'all know Shelley Allen. There was no one more upset with the progress of the audit than Shelley Allen. but there was nothing we could do. So,
Well, that's all the questions I had, I think.
Dr. Scott?
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Trapp. You asked most of my questions, but I guess the only question I would have is, I know it was due December 1st, and the board was not made aware, and I guess my question would be, why wasn't the board made aware that we could not meet this deadline, and what could we have done, to help you guys meet the deadline? Because when I think about people, when we're interviewing, the first thing people ask, how do you work, and are deadlines important to you? And how important are deadlines? And when we're talking about this deadline, this is a deadline that could put us in the news, on fiscal watch, and we're talking about our priorities, and many of us talked about we want our priorities to give teacher bonuses, to use money for recruitment and retention, and so be it. But if we get to that level, we may not have the funds. So do you know, and you may not even have the answer to this question, do you know if the board was made aware?
we
And if
included in the
not,
board brief
ma-
in November, yes, ma'am.
So in the November board briefing, you
Yes, ma'am.
included that you will not make the deadline?
Yes, ma'am, that we were short-staffed, that we would be late on the audit because of the IG's report. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we'll have to go back and look at that. And I guess with that, if it was included, you said short staff. I thought we were fully staffed at that time.
Well, the top 30 people that we've talked about that have left in the last, that are leaving in the 3-week period, they were here. But we have two positions that we haven't been able to fill for the last 6 to 9 months, which puts pressure on other people in our department.
So I guess that's something that you and HR department could have
Yes, ma'am,
worked
we're
out to
addressing
try
it.
to,
We have the same
recruiting.
issues as teachers in terms of it's hard to find good talent, and so we have been working at it. Yes, ma'am.
and I guess my last question would be, so in November, you guys said that you would need another 60 days?
No, we weren't sure how long it would take us. We knew it was going to be, we knew it was going to be late because of all the time we had spent on the IG's work.
Right, so did you ask for an extension with the State Department?
We didn't think we would need one. We get a 30-day grace period, so we thought we would make it. We didn't.
So at that time, did you guys come back and say, we didn't make the grace period, so we need an extension?
We certainly informed leadership that we were going to be late and that we might not make it by January 31st.
Okay, thank you so much.
Any other members? Mrs. Washington?
Yes, so I have questions. Can you tell me the process of submitting the audit? Like, what are the steps that you take?
Yes,
that your
ma'am.
department takes?
Now, there are two things that we do. We submit something that's required by the State Department of Education. Okay? That's the primary one. That's the one that has a December 1st deadline. There are components of our complete CAFR that we submit to award agencies, government organizations, and that's not required by the State Department. We have not worried about that at this point. The ones we submit to the State Department are all submitted online. And once we get the auditor's report, in fact, I talked to Ms. Myers, who we wrote the letter to the other day, and I talked to her today's Tuesday. Talked to her yesterday, and Melissa, listen, we're not going to make it today. Would it be better to submit partial in our financial statements? We can do that. She said, no, we need the auditor's report. There's no reason to submit your financial statements until we have the auditor's independent report. That's what we're waiting on right now. And it is not I don't want to lay any blame on the auditor's firm, the accounting firm. They are very good auditors. They've been an auditor for several years. They do quite a bit of auditing all over the state. It's not their fault. We got our information to them late. They're working as fast as they can.
Okay, so you said you compile financial statements, you send those statements to the audit company or the audit firm. They then send you back information, and then you're able to upload it to the State
Correct.
Department. Okay, so earlier I heard you say that there was some questions from the firm that they needed some clarification.
Yes.
Can you share one of those questions that they've asked you?
There was one table that had the, and I don't have the notes in front of me, but one of them, for instance, he said, wait, the table blank blank has the last year's prior, the amount in your financial statement was the same as last year's dollar number. Is that an error or is that just a coincidence? That type of question.
Okay, okay. And then I do have one request.
And
So,
let me follow up. That's not unusual to have
Okay.
the auditor call us and
Right.
say, hey, look on page 42, explain to me that. The problem now is, of course, we're under this tremendous pressure in terms of timeline.
okay. And so I do have one request, and it's not something urgent, but if I can see previous year's audits,
Yes,
previous
ma'am,
school years.
they're all online. I
Okay.
can certainly get them to you. Yes,
Or,
ma'am.
yeah, just send a link of where we can go and
Certainly.
view that
Yes, ma'am.
information. So what are some things, some of the findings that you, in those financial statements, are there any errors or things that are sticking out to you that we need to be aware of when we're coming up in this budget season?
I don't think so at all. No, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. McFadden?
what is added to the audit? What are you sending to him other than the financial statements that we get, the quarterly reports that we get? What other things are you sending to them other than that?
If you
Those.
go to our audit and look at the financial section, it's those 40 or 50 pages of tables of data.
Right, so I did go through the audit book last year really well, and the tables are pretty much, turn them one way, take out certain information, but all of it comes from the general quarterly report that you give us. Is that all right?
Well, the quarterly reports is kind of a running cumulative total that is then reflected in the annual final audited numbers. Yes, ma'am.
So does that include information from schools, like their departments? Is that what's included in the audit? You're waiting for maybe information from the schools?
No, we're
to
not
come
waiting
up?
right now, we're not waiting for any information from the district. We've submitted all our financial information to the auditors firm.
Right, so what I'm saying is that what information, other than the quarterly reports, go into the audit? When I went through the audit book, I noticed that, it had departmental, different breakdowns and things like that.
The audit is much, much more detailed than the quarterly summary report to you. And I'll certainly be happy to go over that some other time, but it's much more detailed. We can
Right,
go
yeah.
by, we could go by table by table.
Well, I don't know that would be that necessary, but thank you. But when I did go through it, it was a lot of different information. And so you're saying that Richland 2 has a unique system. So what I'm asking is that other than the financial report that we had, that you give us, is there information that at the time you were waiting on to get in, to put into the system?
Not now.
Yeah, no, I mean during the time that we were
Well,
supposed to get it done.
Yeah, there's not data we're waiting for, but we may have not ended and closed out that book for that account. And so we've accumulated it, but we haven't added it, proofed it, made sure all of the subtractions and additions are accurate, and we haven't closed that fund out. But we're not waiting for any more information because there's no, we once we close the books, whatever we do is for the next fiscal year. So we don't go back and change any of those numbers. Does that help?
Oh, I found it online, so you don't have to
Okay,
email me.
okay.
Thank you.
I was going to say, can you send us that link in the web?
If you go to the services, district services, go to business operations, and then go to financial reports, it's the comprehensive annual report. Yes, yes. And you'll sleep well that day.
Well, and I have a few comments and some questions, and just to lay the time frame, this new board, the 4 new board members took their seats November 18th. Their first meeting was November 29th, and we actually had Ms. Allen come and speak to us at that point, but there was no mention during that meeting. I realized that it was a first quarter review, but there was no mention at that time to the board of any concerns. You said in November we did, in a board briefing, it was brought to our attention. You talked about some of my colleagues asked about getting additional help. So there weren't, with a 4-month time period, that wouldn't be enough time to bring in a couple of employees to train them on the system to help you get the information processed and out to the IG, to the auditor, to make things easier for your department?
In my opinion, no, because the people that would have needed to train them were working on the IG's report. That's the problem.
Okay, and the superintendent was aware of all your concerns?
We talked about the audit being late because of the IG's report. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because one of the concerns, my biggest concern is, and board members correct me if I'm wrong, we were told, I heard that we were given an extension by the State Department.
Extension was the wrong word. I don't know. I may have used that, misspoke at some point, talking to staff or something. We don't get an extension. There's the grace period, and then there's the 60-day limit in terms of your last 60-day, your 60-day limit. But there's no extension. So if I use that in public, I apologize. I didn't mean it. We don't get an extension. I don't think I used that word, but I might have. What we did know, and why I would assume, I can't speak for Ms. Allen, but I assume that the reason she didn't say anything that night is we all thought we might make the end of January.
Well, I was a bit surprised on January 10th. I was CC'd on a letter as the board chair, letting us know that they hadn't received our audit, and a nice letter from Molly Spearman telling us all the consequences we would face if we didn't meet the 60-day deadline. And I sent an email to our superintendent just saying, please respond to Ms. Johnson or respond to me via email regarding this email immediately. I never heard anything, and not from the former superintendent, not from your department. So the week later, I followed up. I'd been out of town, and I wrote to Melissa Myers, who we've talked about, and asked her, I said, I was under the impression that we were granted an extension. Could you please tell me what the date is in your understanding? And her response was, the department is unable to grant extensions to the annual audit deadline due to the deadline being set in state statute. We don't have the authority to override state law.
Yes, ma'am. No, that's my understanding as well.
So then we get to a meeting. We've got a new interim superintendent last week. We're having a meeting. She wasn't aware that we didn't have this in. So we're all sitting here finding out days before it's due that we haven't submitted it, and this board, this district, we've got a good chance of being told in the next day or two that we're under fiscal watch now.
I hope we aren't, but you're right. Those things have happened, and I'm sorry that perhaps I did not communicate it to Ms. Gregory prior to her being interim. That was probably not in our two lanes. They never crossed. But again, we all thought that we would make it by January 31st.
All right, board members, any other questions or comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, I did find where Dr. Miley was speaking about the finance update. In the audit update in November the 22nd, it says the business services team is playing catch-up on the closeout process and external audit completion as a result of the additional time spent on the Inspector General's investigation requests and information. So it is in our board docs for November the 22nd. So I do see that. So I don't know if we knew that it would be done or not, because that was the second. It was due on the 22nd of November. It's due on the 1st, but still, it is in there. So,
Dr. Scott, did you have a comment?
Comment. Ms. McFadden, did it say it was going to be late? Because what you read did not say that it's going to be late and we're not meeting the deadline.
right. It doesn't say that, and it doesn't say it was late. I guess what Dr. Miley was trying to say was that they were hoping they would make that deadline. I'm not sure, but I did find it in here on that part. So
Right, but
no other
again, it did
information
not
was given.
say that it was reported to the board that it was going to be late and they would not meet the deadline. Based on what you read, that's not what it said. And I think Dr. Miley said that they informed the board on board docs that they would not make that deadline. So that's not what you read. Correct?
I thought Dr. Miley had just said that he had given us the information that they would be behind. And I think playing catch up is behind, but just
Well,
because
no, playing catch-up does not mean I would not meet the deadline, but that's fine. Thank you.
not a problem. I just wanted to let you know that it was in there.
Any other questions, comments?
Yes, I do have a final question. What does, in your conversations with the State Department, what does fiscal watch really mean?
I think we're going to be on watch. That means they're going to pay attention to us more, and that if we don't perform, we don't get this audited in soon, they may take other measures. I don't think there's any lost recognition at the State Department about Richland 2, our history, our record. I think they understand and are sympathetic, but they have a state law to adhere to, and we understand that.
Any more questions? All right, let's move along to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Miley. Item 4.1, meal debt moratorium.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mrs. Porter.
I'm looking at our docs, and I see that we are still in a moratorium, and one of the recommendations was that we at least begin notifying parents of the negative balances. Also, that we have, from our last report that we received, that there was funds collected to contribute to the balance, but from my understanding, that has not been actually added to the balance as of yet. And so my questions are, how do we start that process so that we know exactly how much balance?
I think we need Mr. Anderson to come up and address this.
Okay. Because I'd hate to send out notices and haven't applied that money yet.
Good evening. I'll happy to answer questions. Real quick, the presentation that was attached was last time's presentation. I unfortunately was in jury duty yesterday, and so I'm here with y'all tonight. So I didn't get a chance to get some updates, but I think Ms. Gregory, I believe, gave you some updates. But your question, Ms. Porter, those funds were donated to the Education Foundation, and the Education Foundation has to determine how they want to spend or use those funds. And as of today, from my understanding, the Education Foundation has not finalized how they will allocate those funds. And so we will work with them on identifying data, but that authority, in essence, has been given to the Education Foundation, not to the district, in terms of how to use those funds. The big donation from the church, there were some specifications in that, and I know that they've been working on how exactly that will be used, because it was more specific, but some other individuals just gave money to the foundation, for example, for to use for debt, and that was all that was put. So they have that sitting in their account. They have not decided the usage for that. So we're trying to make sure the foundation works separately from the district, so we're not mixing those dollars back and forth.
So if we were to start sending out notifications, how would we inform our parents that the amount that they're seeing could possibly change if the Education Foundation saw fit to use those funds?
Well, I think what might be helpful is just to real quickly maybe go over, paint a little better, I won't say better picture, but just to talk about the data that you have in front of you now.
Mm-hmm.
So then that way we can sit down and work better with how we plan on addressing our plans together of looking through this and then working with that. So if you look at your spreadsheet you have on the second page, and I apologize if it's not very clear, But you see on the first page, it makes it look like as of January 26, we have $547,000. But a positive is, if you look on the second page, of that, 64% is $0 to $25. 10% is 25 to 50. The majority of our debt is well under $100. We only have 20 students with over $1,000 each of debt. So when you add up that small amount, and I'll be honest, that little boy over there currently has a $42 worth of debt. So, so Mr. Anderson is falling down to pay his because he likes to eat a lot. But so when we got, I believe it was one of the board members asked to kind of start looking at it differently. When we started analyzing it more specifically, we realized that our approach, and I zoomed in as best I could yesterday during breaks at jury duty, and our team with the communications team went through a kind of a approach of really focusing on a phone call, an individual letter, and working through a plan of action with those 20 people and those others who were in that $500, $1,000 range. I guess it's about 60 folks with individual phone calls and working through how we can work with them. And then going back to some of our previous methodologies of sending the email reminders and to others such as myself that, hey, your son has gotten a debt and we need to make sure you're paying your debts off. So with that all being said, then going to the working with us, taking information from these 60 people who have debt of over $500 and saying, all right, Education Foundation, these are the students that we've identified that have a large debt. And if it's your decision to help these families, then this is what might be your best solution. But that would be our thought, as opposed to, it wouldn't be fair for me to take a donation when I can pay my $40 or something. It might be somebody who needs that help more than myself. So that's kind of a real quick summary of where we're at today, but happy to answer any other questions or thoughts or feedback as how we can work on this together.
Dr. Scott.
Mr. Anderson, you mentioned about the church. I know that the church had a presentation of $100,000 that they were giving to Richland too. Have they identified where that money is going, and have we received that $100,000?
I don't want to speak out of turn. I don't think Ms. Owens is here. Dr. Miley may know because Ms. Owens it was working with that. I believe the $50,000 has been sent, and they've promised, or whatever you call that, the other $50,000. Dr. Miley, do you know for sure?
Correct. The first $50,000 was received by the church, and it was distributed to the 5 high schools, either foundation or PTOs. It was not given to the schools or the district. It was given to those independent organizations, so that for that purpose.
For the purpose of meal debt?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Well,
so
I'm not sure meal debt was the only purpose. I think it was for helping kids eat.
Okay, so the check said $100,000. So I guess that was misleading with standing with the check for $100,000 because we only received $50,000. So is there a promise made by this church as to when we could expect? Because the public thought we received $100,000, and we have not. So that was misleading. But we have received $50,000, which we are grateful for. So is there any commitment as to when these families or the schools will receive the other $50,000?
To my knowledge, I was at the press conference when it was announced. The other $50,000 was supposed to be in the next 6 months or so and be used for help homeless and things like that, and that would be coming to the church. That's my understanding, but it was coming to the church first. So, and I don't really know the status of it right now.
Okay,
But
I would love for you to look into that and find out when do we expect the next $50,000. Thank you.
Board members, any more questions, comments? Mrs. Porter?
Yes. So from the last statement about the moratorium, it was that we would remain in the moratorium until a decision was made. So are we not going to make a decision, or are we going to continue to allow the debt to accumulate
So,
without notification?
Mr. Anderson, go ahead, because I have an understanding, but you,
I know, I was just going to say, we'd like to start sending the notifications out again. But I know the last time we talked about this, I wasn't very clear on exactly what was, so unless Ms. Agostini had your thought process, we're happy to do that, but we know this has been in the news and all that, so we want to make sure that we're working together, not doing something that y'all aren't ready for us to send out yet. So.
well, first of all, I'd suggest that we work with our new PR person to draft up a nice letter to send out to the parents, or because I would like to see something going out. That's me personally. It's one person. Again, and I try to go back and watch that August 2022 special called meeting, because again, I never took away from that meeting that we were going to just not reach out to people and ask them or notify them that they owed money. My understanding leaving that meeting was that we were not going to take the meal that was served to the kid and walk around the corner and throw it away, nor were we going to make a kid go hungry. But I never thought we were going to cease, contact with parents to say, hey, you're a little bit behind, because we've all seen some on Facebook, and we got a message from somebody, an email from a constituent saying, send me an email. I didn't know, and send it before it piles up and gets into the $1,000 mark. Because again, I'm going to use your son, because you told us last time that he'd go and buy 3 bags of chips for his friends. But I have kids that would have done the same thing. And until they get that notice, chips on the house for the whole school. So I do think that parents need, a nice notification. And I will also thank you for the breakdown, because I had in my head it was probably the typical 80-20 rule, which this is pretty much pointing to. And a lot of issues, I think, can be addressed, and we can see significant improvement with reducing the cost of the kids that just come in and say, oh, lunch is free, or identifying those that really need help. So thank you for breaking that down and, making it a little bit more of a personal touch to reach out to those families.
Madam Chair.
Dr. Scott.
Yes, I would like to see us make contact with those parents this week, because if they don't know, they can't do anything about it. And I think the ones that have a debt, I think our parents would appreciate receiving something so they can make payments. I don't think they're not making payments because they don't care. They're not making payments because they're not aware. So if we can just get that information out, that would be great.
Greg has, and I should call you Mr. Turchetta, sorry.
Hi, I just wanted to give you some context on the notification system, because what we spoke about earlier as our emergency communication system, Parent Square, that product came online in September. So now that that's online, that's where the messaging will come through, and parents can go in and they can set debt limits, so they get notifications in that system at whatever threshold they set. So that's new. That's something we're going to do starting with this communication plan. And then the other 20 parents that have the larger debt, we have an individualized plan for them.
Yes,
they would work back through their principals and communicate their needs.
Yes, but I don't want to depend on Parent Square, because not everyone use that.
Sure.
So I would love to have a system that's set up. We have, I don't know if it's still called Connect Ed or the point.
They replaced it with
So
That's this,
So what is it called now?
Parent Square.
Parent Square.
This is the one stop where all parents go to. So much like when I send them an emergency message, they have to
Right.
go in and put their information in there. All the school messages come through this system, so it's one stop
So it goes to
shopping.
their phone for text messages as
Correct.
well, the school,
Correct.
And are we putting something on the school's website saying, parents, in case you have not checked Parent Square, please check to make sure that your child has no outstanding debt?
That would be the plan as soon as we make the decision to activate it.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mrs. Porter.
Yes, Mr.
Turchetta.
Turchetta, sorry. I'm gonna get it right. Turchetta. Can you, maybe for this situation, is it possible that we can send letters via mail with instructions also of how to update phone numbers in Parent Square, being that it is a new system, and possibly with a date of when the official cease of moratorium will, like when it will end. And right. That way it goes via mail, and we know with return addresses what addresses have changed. And then we know that they have all the instructions that they need for Parent Square, and it can be
Yes.
updated.
Keep in mind, and part of my research this week and getting up to speed on the issue is
Yes.
some of this debt stretches back many years because lunch debt stays with the student through their career. Some of these folks are tough to find with the transient population. So
Correct.
the letter is certainly something we added to the toolbox, but it's not going to be
Okay.
the guarantee. And we will, one of my priorities is when it comes to communicating with parents is to get them to know, as Dr. Scott, you said, to go to that system, to update their information. I had that conversation with parents today after the Spring Valley call. If somebody contacted me and said, I didn't get the text message, the phone
Right.
call, or the email,
I
then
got those too.
you need to go in and update your information.
Yeah.
But this will be a challenge with this issue.
Yes.
Madam
I do know that Parent Square is better than what we've had in the past.
So far, I'm a fan.
Yes, because in the past, parents would block the notification from Connect Ed and forget that they blocked it, and it would block it forever. And their kids would go to middle school and high school and wonder why they haven't received anything, and they forgot they blocked it when their child was in 4th grade. So, but this is
I would
much
tell you
better.
that's a state and national trend as well.
Right.
Madam Chair?
I just had a question. How will you all be working with schools because you have a list of schools here. Is there something targeted that will be happening with the administration to where they will be helping with some of this communication as well?
Our plan right now is to, craft our message, to make sure our message is good. And again, I'm speaking for Greg here, but making sure that we have a good message so we understand what we're doing, and then doing the Parent Square, and then working with the schools on those individuals or those areas that we need to work with. So it's an ongoing process, and but we will target those areas. We obviously, as you look, you can see that middle school percentage-wise, that's, if you think about it, that's the lowest number of students we have. And we've probably got 8,000 middle school students, but they've got the second highest total of debt. And so there's, what can we do better to make sure middle school students are not doing that? I.e., I do have an older son who's in middle school. Is he going to the line and buying food? You give middle school a lot more freedom to do those types of things. So maybe we need to look at the way we're doing our point of sale system, redo some of these things. So these are things definitely we've been looking at and analyzing better. But we'll definitely look at these we've been looking at these schools, we've been talking to the cafeterias, and we will incorporate the school as much as we can on assisting us with updating information, making sure that parents put money on the school accounts, those types of things.
And so, because I remember this August conversation, and I believe last year it was 72,000, and then in August we hear it's up to 400,000. How can we ensure this is not going to happen year after year?
I think I mentioned it last time. It's really more about if we put in some pretty hard accountability measures. I mean, I think that's more than anything. Right now, we allow a child, and I hate to say a child because it's really not fair to the child, but to get a meal, regardless if you don't have money. You can't go anywhere else in the world and not just go grab something for free and not technically pay for it. So right now, that's what we do, and that's okay. We want kids to eat. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but it makes it difficult for the frontline worker who makes $10, $12 an hour to try to make sure this kid, oh, you don't have money in your account, then we're putting it. It's a lot. It's difficult, and I don't have an answer for you right now, but I know we're going to continue to work to try to figure out the best way. Again, the positive is it's small amounts for a vast majority, the 80-20 that Ms. Agostini mentioned. So it's probably just people just like myself, like, oh crap, I forgot to put money on my child's account. But those other ones, we just got to continue to work with and making sure we can work with them. So it's difficult. I mean, you go to a gas station or anywhere else, you don't have money, you're out of luck, and that's something we don't do. And it's probably the right thing to do to make sure that kids get fed, but we just need to think that through. And that's something that I think the board has to probably play a little bit of a role in as well to make sure what we want to do.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is the communication piece, because I agree with Chair Agostini, is I don't see where we said stop the communication. So I just want to make sure that, because the calls that I received is, I had no idea. And so it's that communication piece. Yeah, I understand with the children, they're going to go through the line. We want our children to eat. But I just want us as a district to make sure that we don't stop that communication, and that we're utilizing all opportunities to connect with parents. If it's open house, schools should have tables set up. I remember those things where if there was debt, that we had a table set up, just kind of working with the schools to make sure that we're being proactive, because like you said, we can't control that debt, but just making sure that we have a plan in place to give parents a variety of opportunities. And to some people, they may say, well, that's too much, we're babying them. No, that's our job, to make sure that students are getting what they need at all times. And that also includes parents who just simply forget, having those measures in place to continue to remind them. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And again, I don't want to, we will do that. I think COVID, the 2 years really just kind of threw stuff for whack because we just didn't do any of that. So it's not an excuse. I mean, I hate, it sounds like an excuse, but here, I understand. We're on the same page. So we'll definitely, moving forward, that's our plan.
Thank you, Mrs. Washington. Mrs. Nash.
I was just going to say, you guys do a really good job on the Facebook, and it seems like you guys have a lot of engagement. Is there ways that you could do a really great video, since video does really well, for maybe even teaching people how to use Parent Square, or some fun video about, hey, don't forget to pay your lunch debt? I don't know. I love that stuff. So maybe there's a cool video. I don't know. Just a thought.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely.
That's the how-to, right? Yeah. Somebody showing how to go into the parent portal, because somebody did say, I only go in twice a year. I don't know how to do it. So that's a great idea.
Great idea. Yep, I'll write that down.
Dr. Scott.
Mr. Anderson, I think my question will be, and I think I asked this the last time we had this conversation, is my concern are our seniors, because that's one of the highlights of serving on this school board, to see those students walk across that graduation stage. And what I don't want to happen is that seniors are notified 2 weeks before graduation that if you don't pay this $1,000 or this $500, you're not going to walk. So I would love to see you guys get with principals and take a look at that debt and see how many are seniors, and begin to have those conversations with those seniors, as well as to send something out to the parents of seniors saying, hey, I know you guys are looking forward to graduation. It's just right down the road. However, before we can get there, the Golden Brick Road, your child has a debt of $59. Something, because it used to break my heart to see seniors 2 weeks before graduation, whether it's, cafeteria debt or what it is, to get that letter 2 weeks, and sometimes a week before, saying, you owe this amount of money, and to see those parents have to go because they were not aware of it, because they lost the book or whatever, and try to get this money at such short notice. So I would love to see us put something in place like immediately for seniors, so they can begin to work off those plans and payments. Thank you.
Mr. Trapp.
Yes, I would like to speak. I'm trying to be nice and let the ladies always go first, but I've noticed that I don't get to talk a lot if I do that. Anyway, a couple of comments, and I have a legitimate question. First off, there is no such thing as a free lunch. I mean, somebody's going to pay for the food one way or the other, and I think the public needs to remember. We get emails and comments from people. Some people think we need to feed everybody, and we do need to feed everybody. I'm not suggesting we don't. Some people think we need to purchase metal detectors immediately for the schools. Everybody, we need more buses. Everybody has their own pet project that they want to see, and we can't please everybody. So having said that, if we want to do something where we're feeding everybody and it's not going to cost the students and the parents anything, if that's the priority, that's what we need to do. If it isn't, then we're going to have to go down the road of collecting debt and then making people pay as they go. Now, my question to you would be, and this would obviously would tie into what it's going to cost us in the long run. And I know you don't have a figure. This is just a general question. How much money are we spending trying to collect and get people to pay as they go? Because there will come a point in time when that will be a high enough number to where that will offset the cost of making all. We'll take a bureaucracy away if we provide meals as part of the educational experience. If you just had to guess, what do you think that would
I just want
be?
to make sure, so what would it cost the district to provide free meals to everybody? Is that what your question is?
That
Or-
compared to what we spend right now administering the policies. In other words, we're obviously, a lot of this is automated. We're not spending money on automated processes, but do we have employees whose only job is to manage this, or is that pretty small?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to the conversation earlier. I mean, staff that now have to focus on this part of their job does pull them away from their other part. The staff the last couple of years when we didn't have to do this, when everybody was free, freed them up to spend more time evaluating kitchens, working on other tasks that really made the quality of the service now. So in essence, to make it more efficient, we probably could hire another person to help with just working on that. But in the grand scheme of things, I mean, it's in the grand scheme of things, if the federal government passed a law that, like the past couple of years, that let everyone free, then that really takes away the burden of Richland too having to funnel that. If we decided as a district that we will cover that cost, it's about $5 million that we'd have to fund out of our general fund. That's a very rough estimate on top of my head that we'd have to cover those costs, and then to cover a cost of an employee. $70,000, $80,000, just ballparking here. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, the answer is very small. In other words, that isn't very much of a consideration then, it sounds like. It's a lot of trouble, but not an enormous amount of trouble.
From a financial point, but from the staff, one person trying to do the job of several, I mean, it's a morale issue and stuff. I mean, it is, but if it's more sense to hire somebody than us pay $5 million, and that might be the more fiscally responsible thing to do.
Well, and I'm also of the opinion, I'll just state this for the record, that one of the things we're doing here with children is preparing to be adults, and we need to make sure children aren't hungry, because you can't learn if you're hungry. At the same time, though, we're missing an opportunity to teach them responsibility. And some of the parents, you hate to ever say things like this, but some of the parents need to be more responsible as well. However, we do live in an age where our society creates irresponsible people. We all, someone the other day, I forget what I was doing, but they didn't get an alarm. They didn't set an alarm, remind them to do something. They missed out on an opportunity, and it was a big deal. But the reality is we depend on alarms too much, but that's where we are. So I really believe that we need to do whatever it takes communication-wise to make sure these parents and responsible people know that they need to do these things. And if it takes an employee or two to do that, I think that's important. And I'll just say for the record too, when I was in high school, we received reduced lunch. So I know what it's like to have to go through and qualify and then go to the trouble to do those things. But there's programs out there, and we need to. I'm of the opinion we need to take advantage of the programs that are available so that we don't. A lot of people, when they're given the opportunity to make the right decision, they're going to make the right decision. They're going to do the things they should, and there's no point in the school district having to pay a lot of money because people are irresponsible. We need to give people a chance to be responsible. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Board members, thank you so much, Mr. Anderson. Moving on to item 4.2, the SIG Recommendations Committee. Mrs. Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So our committee has provided updates to administration for Cognia that was required for the Board of Trustees. I want to encourage everybody to go look at those action steps. The Inspector General, I was getting ready to say SIG, but the Inspector General, he actually indicated that there is no formal deadline. However, there are some items that he is asking the district to update by March 31st regarding the items, expenditure items regarding the P cards. So that was the only deadline that's in there. The committee, however, would like to set a deadline of June 30th to have all the findings and recommendations and action steps in place, whether they are completed or in progress by June the 30th, the end of the school year. I will be meeting with the administration to determine some checkpoints for the committee to work with the administration, and I'm asking the committee to focus on specific areas so that we can report back to the board what's happening in finance, HR, as well as with the Board of Trustees. Additionally, there was no recommendation for the Premier 100 initiative. However, I am asking administration to please provide us with an update on this initiative and the future use for it for all Richland 2 teachers. That was one of the recommendations, is that we want to make sure that we're providing the same level of support for all teachers. And so if the board can receive an update on the Premier 100 initiative and how the district plans to utilize this initiative going forward, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, an audit of the employees' records was to be completed by HR on January the 15th. If the findings of that report can also be shared with the board in lieu of some things that have been shared with us from administration. And also, as stated in the last board meeting, and as a recommendation, retention and recruitment has to be in place. We have to make sure that we have some type of structure in place for retaining and recruitment. We spent $2.5 million on recruiting international teachers. That same $2.5 million can be spent on a retention or some type of bonus plan or some type of incentives for our employees so that we can make them stay. I am going to say this again. You can drive up and down Two Notch and you can see several different districts are recruiting in the Northeast area for our teachers. It is very important and it is urgent, y'all, that we have something in place to retain our teachers. This is recruitment season, and I know for a fact that many of us know teachers who are already saying that they're going out the door, and we do not need to lose the great talent that we have here in Richland too. So I am asking that the HR department work with the board so that we can put a plan in place, and it's a solid plan, one that we can continue to revisit for retaining employees. Also, finally, the Board of Trustees, we need to review the recommendation for 7A and 7B. We will need to meet with Richland County Sheriff's Department as well as our district council to revise the administrative rule, KI-R, with legal counsel, and we also need to talk about that trespass, the trespass that's coming up. So we'll need to get a date on the calendar so that we can work with the administration and the county to come up with the best possible solution. And then again, working with council to revise that administrative rule. I'm going to ask Trustee Trapp if you can oversee the recommendation and action steps for the finance portion, and making sure that in those areas, whatever action steps have been indicated by administration, that if we need clarity, let's ask the right questions. If there are not specific measures that are in place that we do not feel as a board is going to meet the requirement, that we get on the calendar of administration to make sure that we're working with them to get those action steps completed. I'm going to ask Trustee Porter if you will oversee the recommendations and action steps for the Board of Trustees, and I am going to oversee the recommendation and action steps for HR Human Capital. With that being said, let's review those action steps and the recommendations to make sure that if it's sufficient, so that we don't have to go through this process again. And that if it's not sufficient, that we're asking clarifying questions to administration to make sure that there are processes, policies, and safeguards in place. If there's a policy that's mentioned in those areas, let's review it and bring that information to the board if there needs to be any revision. But I will say the IG already stated the areas that we needed recommendations, and most of those we've already started working on. I'm going to meet with Dr. Franklin next week. We're going to create a timeline of checkpoints so that we can check in with the administration, and that information is going to be shared with the committee as well as the board. And again, this is to make sure that we have processes and procedures in place to correct these findings. And if any of the committee members have anything that they'd like to share, feel free to do so.
Thank you, Mrs. for that thorough report. You had requested some information in about the middle of your presentation, and I think some from HR. Could you be sure to email Mrs. Gregory and just copy me? So, because you gave a wealth of information, so send us a copy of what your request is.
Absolutely.
Dr. Scott, you had a question or comment?
I do. I just have, you mentioned a policy, and for those who are listening, they would not have the policy in front of them. So if you don't mind just sharing what that policy is. And
Yes.
then my second question before you do that is, I think we had a conversation about administrative rules, and I know we have many. So later, I would like for us to have copies of all of the administrative rules, because what we have noticed is administrative rules sometimes override policies. And sometimes we decide to go with the administrative rules, sometimes we go with policy, and if we're policy makers, I think we just need to stick with policies. So I would love, at some time later, that we take a look at those administrative rules and we do away with all administrative rules.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
So we will need to, the administrative rule that I was speaking about, is that the one you're talking about? Rule ARKI-R? Yes. Okay, yep, that's the one.
And what's the name of that? What's the title of it?
Oh, let me look it up. I'm sorry. Just for people who are. Okay, thank you.
It says visitors.
Visitors? Okay, visitors.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mrs. Porter.
Is there, so this is just for clarification because I'm learning. Is there not a rule with the administrative rules associated with the South Carolina School Boards Association?
So the policy is written and approved by the board.
Correct.
Administration, and I think different districts operate differently. Administration here will go through and write down more of a protocol, so to speak. And Dr. Franklin or Mrs. Gregory, if you want to correct me if I'm using the wrong words, but they sort of write the protocol or process often of how the policy is going to be executed. But that is not something that the board votes on. That is written by administration, the administrative rule. The board votes on policy.
Okay,
That will be a great question for you too at your new board training.
yes. Also.
Oh, I think Mrs. Gregory wants to address
I was
that.
going to address, we do make you aware. We always do when we do those, but you're right. Those are generally done by administration, and we also get guidelines from the School Board Association for those.
Thank you.
Okay. Also, excuse me, for the HR mention that you had as for recruitment and retention, I just wanted to share, because it was one of the priorities that was listed, and I'm not sure if, based on what you stated, if it will be acted upon or taken, or I don't know. But I wanted to share a possible solution for, or something that was shared with me from a constituent, is that we have contracts that are being signed. The date is approaching soon, and something that has taken place in the past was there was a bonus that was given to all employees, including those leaving, and not just those that signed contracts. So that if there is a bonus given, to just keep in mind that in the past, there was a bonus that was given, and some of those checks went to people who were walking out the door. And so to keep that in mind when coming up with whatever bonus is decided upon. And then another suggestion was a years of service bonus to encourage our teachers with many years of service to stay longer by having a staggering amount of the bonus, and those who are at 28 years to stay. So if you stagger the amount of the bonus for those who have been here longer, maybe those who were going to retire will stay another year or two. So just put some thought behind that versus just writing a check and sending them out the door.
Agreed. Dr. Scott?
Yes, and just to piggyback on what Mrs. Porter said, I know one time we used to give attendance bonus, and I think maybe that's something we should consider as well, because when you did that, those teachers looked forward to it, and I was one of them. And it encouraged them to come, not when they're sick, but it really encouraged them to be there because they would use that money for, for the holidays and for vacations and things like that. So if possible, I'd like for us to consider maybe the attendance bonus.
Mrs. Nash?
Okay, so I was just going to say, was that 2.5 million, was that what we did for 2022 or 2021, or is it 2021?
I don't have the specifics.
Oh, okay.
I just know it was in the report.
So but it was for a year?
So that's something
Was
I
that
would
for,
have to
was
ask.
it for a year?
That's something I would have to ask administration.
Okay.
The money that was listed in the IG report for the $2.5 million for recruiting international teachers, was that the previous school year, or is that a total amount over the years? Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you.
And I will say that in the recommendation, or in the action steps, that is one of the requests from HR, is that we allocate some money for bonuses.
Okay, that's what I was
so-
asking, because I didn't know if it
yeah.
was, if we're coming up with the budget soon, there's a conversation
Right.
that needs to be had there, and we need the information to do that.
And there are two different ways we can do that. One, we're waiting to hear, when we get the final audit, we'll see what the reserve funds are. That's one way. And two, we're getting ready to do our budget season, so that's also another way to consider addressing.
So
Yes.
with that budget, does that mean that we can go ahead and earmark funds for the upcoming year of how we
When we
want-
do the budget, that's what we'll be doing.
Okay.
But it's a long, I don't want to say a long, drawn-out process, but it's a very thorough process that includes everybody. And I believe we're starting that at the end of February, at our February 28th meeting. It's put on the agenda to start talking about the budget for the next year. Any other questions, concerns? Do I have a motion to adjourn? A motion to adjourn, please?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. McFadden?
I move that we adjourn the January 31st board workshop meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. McFadden and seconded by Dr. Scott. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your right hand. All those opposed? The vote is 7 yes. There are 0 no's. The motion carries. Have a great night.